Hello, folks. You're listening to another episode of DJ Dell's Dynamic Music Podcast. I'm your host, DJ Dell 523. Oh, yes. What are we going to talk about today? Well, at first I was thinking that I was going to avoid the subject altogether, but you know what? With everything going on right now, I figured that I had to give at least my take to a degree as far as what's gone on with the election. So I'm going to make it brief. This is going to be a short podcast here today. We're just going to talk about a little bit what I think. First of all, in terms of who won, I will say that I'm not really a Trump fan. Am I happy that Biden won? Yes, I am. Although I will say, though, that with that, I do hope that things change. Because we've seen this before in the past where someone's got in and you thought things were going to be a whole lot better and they ended up not being that way. Because, after all, at the root of it, they are politicians. So I think that with the last election, a lot of what happened was people kind of just assumed that Hillary was going to get into office. And because of all the hype that was out there that she was going to get in, that a lot of people just kind of backed off. And where they could have voted, they didn't because they just assumed that she had it in the bag. She, in turn, didn't focus her attention enough on trying to get people to vote for her as well, because I think, just my own personal opinion, but I think she kind of got caught up in her own hype a bit too much, and as a result of that, didn't necessarily take, her voters seriously. And as a result of that, Trump comes in, and whether you like him or not, the fact of the matter is, he's an opportunist. He knows, he listens to what people want, and whether he's truly going to do them or not is irrelevant. He knows what people want to hear, and he says exactly that. So, where she wasn't necessarily talking about issues, he was bringing stuff up. The economy was in flux, so he promised jobs. He also knew that, a lot of jobs have gone overseas and down in South America, Mexico, whatnot. And what did he do? He promised to bring jobs back to America. And because this is what people wanted to hear, and while Hillary wasn't really saying too much about that, he was able to pull people in who under normal circumstances might not necessarily vote for him. And if you don't think that's true, all you have to do is just look back and see the fact that this is not the first time that he's run for office. He's run a couple of times and usually never got this far. Obviously, he made it to the ultimate level this time around because he was elected president. But prior to that, he had ran unsuccessfully. So I think a lot of people that were upset with the fact that he got in needed to take a look in the mirror and see that, we're part of the problem. Because depending on who you talk to, it could be argued that you had two bad candidates there. But the problem was, people talked a lot of stuff, but when the grits hit the fan, so to speak, those people did not go out to vote. And because of that, that's how they lost. And this time around, people went out to vote. So it looks like right now, as we stand, Biden's going to be president. Now, mind you, there's going to be some opposition. And to be honest with you, I think part of the issue is, I believe personally that Trump was laying the seeds of doubt even before the election totals came in. Because he came out, and one of the things that he said was that he didn't want his constituencies, he didn't want them voting through mail. He was promoting the fact of going to the polls, and no, you don't need to go through mail, mail's fraudulent, blah, 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 whatever. So to make a long story short, he now assumes, because in the past a lot of his followers, not all of them, but a lot of them follow him blindly, that he assumed that by merely just saying that they shouldn't go and mail in their votes, but rather go in, that took care of the Republican vote. Now we know that the Republicans are all going to be voting at the polls. So now we can make a claim that any of the mail-in votes that are coming in are all Democrats, and because we're going to assume that they're all Democrats, we can say that they've somehow rigged the election. Well, the problem with that is that argument might hold a bit of weight if this was a normal year, even though there's been other states who've already had mailing ballots in place for years now, and it's worked successfully for them. However, the fact is, he lays the seeds of doubt. So now all of a sudden, you have the mail-in votes come in, and it's like, well, look, there's got to be something wrong here. And he's asking for all these recounts. Legally, he can do that. However, the one thing that I do find funny is if we look back to 2016. In 2016, he laid the groundwork down for there to be a recount with Hillary because he was sure that he was going to lose. But then when it turned out that he had won, even though he didn't win the popular vote, that ultimately doesn't matter because it's the Electoral College that matters in the American government. So therefore, he won the electoral vote. Even though he lost the popular vote, if you notice, he didn't ask for a recount then. And, I mean, he could have, because, I mean, since he was saying that the system was rigged before, why not call for a recount there just to confirm that you won? But no, it didn't happen. We fast forward to now. All of a sudden, we have a situation where, same kind of scenario, except this time, Biden actually has the popular vote. And for a while, in the race when they were counting, it looked as if Biden had the popular vote, but Trump had the electoral vote. Or actually, I should say it was the opposite. Trump had more of the electoral vote, Biden had more of the popular vote. And then it turned out that it turned around, and here we are right now. The one thing that I will say as far as the mail-in votes is concerned is that, for one, you don't know how many Republican voters voted through mail-in votes, because the reality is this isn't like other years, because now all of a sudden we have a situation where we have a pandemic, we have people who are inside who normally wouldn't be inside. So because of that, a lot of people are voting mail-in simply because they don't want to be around crowds, because let's face it, if you go to vote, normally there's a crowd of people there, and a lot of people, if given the option to avoid the crowds, are going to do it. So to me, it's one of those things where it's like, do you say it's fraudulent? I think that by saying that, even before there's been really any real solid proof, I think that in a way, I know that you're trying to just label it on one side, but considering the fact that some people who voted for you also voted that way, you're calling them, dishonest as well. And this is the reason why, even though I have no problem with them making sure that all the votes are accurate, I do think that this is the reason why you see that some people who would normally be on his side have even come out and said, hey, we might want to ease up on that a bit, because you know what? Not only are you talking about the people who we don't vote like, being the Democrats or whatever, you're also talking about us, because guess what? Some of the people on the right voted through mail-in as well. And are you saying that we're cheaters too? So in that sense, that's what happened. But all that aside, I think what needs to happen right now is I think that with Biden being in office, now, whether he follows through with this, we'll see. But one of the things that I think that was important that was said by him and was also said by Kamala Harris was the fact that we need to unify the country. Because at the end of the day, whether you're on the right or the left, you're all Americans. So the thing is, there's been a lot of people over these last 4 years who haven't talked to each other because they're on one side or another. And I mean, if you think about it, this is unprecedented, because this isn't the first time that we've had left or right issues, but this is the first time we've had something so polarizing to the point where it's dividing families like this. This didn't happen with George W. Bush. This didn't happen with George Sr. It didn't even happen with Reagan. But yet this is happening now. And I mean, for all the people that are saying that about the United States and standing with pride in that, this is the time to show it. People need to stand in unity. Shake your buddy's hand. Make up. Just understand that you can, even if you disagree on issues, just agree to disagree, but you don't have to be apart. You don't have to divide as a nation over something like this, because ultimately, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, the one thing that I will say about Trump is he had a habit of, if he knew that he could divide a crowd in order to get it on his side, he did it time and time again. Even now, don't be shocked, it's already started. He's going to start firing people who are on his side, because at the end of the day, this is a president that as long as you agreed with him wholeheartedly, you were cool. But if you questioned him or disagreed, all of a sudden he didn't want to have anything to do with you and he got rid of you. And okay, it would be one thing if he was just doing this to political enemies. That's one thing. But the fact is, he even does it to people who are his allies. You know what I mean? And that's got to tell you something, So really, this is a time for healing, okay? This is a time, as a country, we need to put our differences aside. And that's the only way that we can move forward, is that we learn to listen to each other, put our differences aside, and move forward as a country. Because at the end of the day, that's all that matters. And some of this talk that we're getting now from some of these extremists on the right-hand side, if you will, they're saying, well, what we can do now is, because we still have control of the Senate, that we can just filibuster, or we can just block anything that Biden tries to put through. I get that you're on different sides of the political aisle, but if all you're doing is blocking everything that's being done, how is that helping the country? I know you have different political parties, but at the end of the day, both parties in any country, democratic country, whether it be Canada, United States, whatever, they all claim that they have the interests of the country at heart. So I think that this is a lesson here. We need to put our money where our mouth is, and if we are true Americans or true Canadians, whatever, we need to show that by, once we're in office, put those political differences aside and just do what's best for the country. That's the platform that you run on when you're trying to get elected, so show that that's what you really mean. And who cares if a good idea comes out and it's from the Republican Party? Don't just stop it because you're a Democrat. And likewise, if a good idea comes out that's good for the country, but it comes out from a Democrat, support it anyway, because guess what? It's about the good of the country, not whether your party put forth the idea or not. Because if you are what you say you are, then the reality is, if something comes out that's good for the country, then both sides should agree on it. And nobody should try to block it just because it's from a different political party. Anyway, I just thought I would say my piece here. And I mean, overall for me, I'm just about fairness, and I'll be honest with you. I didn't like some of the things that this president did. Now, was there anything good that came out of him being in office? Actually, to be honest with you, there were some good things. However, I think what it got overshadowed by is the fact that this is a guy who, when he doesn't get his way, he uses bully tactics. He calls people names and whatnot, like when he was going after Elizabeth Warren and calling her Pocahontas and all these different names. Here's the thing. To me, with that particular situation, if it's a case that you want to argue the fact that maybe she wasn't in fact Native American and that wasn't fair that she got a scholarship or whatever based on minority status that she didn't have, well, then the proper argument would have simply been to say, look, she took away an opportunity from someone who was Native American who could have possibly got that scholarship by lying about her ethnicity. If that was the case, I think people would be more behind him. But the fact that he then said that and then went into like using racial tropes and whatnot, all of a sudden it takes away any credibility that you had, because it's like, you know what? You're using bully tactics. And not only that, you're supposed to be the leader of the free country. And if you're a leader of a free country, the world superpower, whatever you want to call it, the fact of the matter is you should not be behaving in that manner. Because people who have less power than him but are in authority positions, if they were to act that way, they would be either reprimanded or removed from their position. So the fact that he could go into an office like that and behave in that way and act as if he was still on one of his reality shows when in fact he was leading the leader of the free world in the United States, it didn't make any sense. And that's why even for any good policy that he had, a lot of it got overshadowed. And the left wasn't completely right either. Both sides needed to work on some stuff for sure, but to me, that was my biggest problem with him, is that he went after people personally. He took personal shots and he just acted like a person who was a bully. And you know what? This is not what we need. We need someone who's a unifier, not someone who is going to divide people apart. And if anything else, you can look at the way this country has gone down and you can see firsthand it's divided people. Now, it doesn't mean that people didn't have these views prior to him coming into office, because I think that's a lie too. However, he's made it acceptable and in a lot of times encouraged it. Just by his very silence on certain issues has encouraged people who otherwise wouldn't try, because they think, well, you know what, if we do this, and if the head of our country doesn't denounce it, or if he does it in such a way where he's kind of saying it but in a backdoor kind of way, then this is what happens. Anyway, these are just my views. This is not reflective of the station at all. It's just something I wanted to say. I appreciate you guys listening. The next show is going to be about music, because I've had a few political-based shows and serious shows. We're going to get to something a little more fun next time, but I figured I'd have to say something just because it's too big of an issue not to address it at all. Anyway, I am DJ Dell 523. I thank you for listening. And I know I said this was going to be a short one. It ended up not being short at all, but that's okay. I thank you guys for listening. I'm going to be back next time. We're going to talk some music. We're going to have some fun. Until next week, I'm DJ Dell 523 saying goodnight and thank you for listening. Thank you for listening to DJ Dell 523's Dynamic Music Podcast. Remember, if you want to check out my radio show, The Urban Flow, you can check me out on Mixcloud at mixcloud.com/DJ DELL523.